Welcome to Western Perspective. I'm Madeline Lombardi. Perth Metropolitan Migrant Resource Centre is at risk of closing down as major funding stakeholders and government organisations are favouring mainstream organisations over local services. WAMN News exclusively spoke with MMRC Board Chair Lena Bakshi about the federal government's remarkable decision to redirect its funding. So, can you tell us why Metropolitan Migrants Resource Centre is at risk of closing down?
The Metropolitan Migrant Resource Centre is a small organisation serving migrants and has been there for the last 27 years, if you know, in the northern suburbs. As a small organisation, and it's not particular to us, you have to compete with much larger organisations for funding. Since 2018, there's been changes in funding at the federal level because centres like us were set up to work or service the refugee humanitarian communities and also immigrants who were in need of a service. Since 2018, there has been a change in how services like ours are funded. Services with larger organisations with national footprints, and I don't want to name them, the funding has been directed to those organisations, and smaller organisations like ours have been moved out of that whole funding paradigm, and so we've literally had to fight for other sources of funding to be able to just survive.
And speaking of funding in particular, as you were saying, with all the work that MMRC has done for the community, why do you think that funding in particular has been redirected to mainstream organisations in particular?
I think some of it is lazy funding policies at the federal level. Some of it is this whole need to have organisations that, to have like a similar way of running services across the board nationally. So you have like one plan of how a service will be run, and then nationally everybody does the same thing. And in some ways that kind of runs counterproductive to a smaller organisation, because a place like the MMRC is local. We have an understanding of what our community is. We have an understanding of what the needs are. There's also a trust that you build over 27 years of being there. There's also an understanding that in the 27 years, the needs of the community change. So a combination of maybe just changes in funding policies at the federal level and the impact of that on smaller organisations.
Things that you just mentioned was funding on a federal level, making decisions for local communities who know about what that local community needs in particular, which is why I want to explain, if you can name an example or explain some of the work that you've been doing, or a specific story of when MMRC helped a member of the migrant community, or kind of the work that you've been doing for local communities in that sense that federal governments don't know about. Things that you just mentioned was funding on a federal level, making decisions for local communities who know about what that local community needs in particular, which is why I want to explain, if you can name an example or explain some of the work that you've been doing, or a specific story of when MMRC helped a member of the migrant community, or kind of the work that you've been doing for local communities in that sense that federal governments don't know about.
Well, I suppose I can't say that federal governments don't know about, so I'll start with that. So the MMRC has been involved in a whole range or a gamut of services. So we have a counselling service, and these services are funded by government. We have a counselling service, we have settlement services, which is settling new arrivals, humanitarian entrants and refugees. We have a homework club, we have a program that helps people who are trying to get back into employment and that kind of training. So the gamut, it's a huge range. But there is a disconnect between what happens at the federal level, I suppose. And the other part I think it's important to say is that WA is kind of, in a sense, far away from everything. So it's quite easy to not have us in the big picture. You know, there's all the larger states that seem to, you know, take up the oxygen. With regards to a small story that you said, and it's really interesting, and that kind of taps into what I said before. So we have had the first generation of a family where we helped support them into kind of settlement. You know, they came in as refugees and new arrivals. And we recently had their son who worked with us as an intern and came as an intern from UWA. So if you can see this kind of intergenerational stuff, that's what we do.
What do you hope for major stakeholders and funding organisations to realise of their decision to invest in mainstream bias in that sense? You know, talking about the locality of community and understanding what the community needs. What is your hope for these major stakeholders and funding organisations to realise in that sense?
I suppose funding organisations need to understand that there is a role for the local. That little organisations like ours don't need to continue to have to put us through the ring all the time to prove that we have a right to exist is huge. So that's the first thing. So they need to understand that there's a need for the local. They need to understand that funding needs to consider the local. And they need to understand also that small organisations may not have the kind of infrastructure and network that just allows for project. There's been this kind of movement towards, let's fund projects. Projects don't give you money to keep the lights on. Projects just are what is done. And so there's this kind of, you know, they need to understand that little organizations like us also need that core money to be able for a day-to-day, you know, just to keep the lights on, pay the bills.
And now here is AMA WA spokesman Dr. Andrew Miller with his weekly COVID-19 update and medical commentary.
Hi, thanks for your time. Been another busy week with COVID news coming in from around the world on the 8th wave and the different legion number of variants out there which seem to be causing problems with hospitalisation at the moment. And of course this is the first wave we've gone into where we've dismantled pretty much all of the public health protections. So it's with some concern that we're seeing a fairly light touch from the government in regards to recommendations around mask usage and so on, and really just leaving it up to people's responsibility to take care of themselves at this stage. That's going to cause a lot of pressure on our hospitals, and we know at the moment they're under pressure already with a lot of people having left the sector and others wondering why it is that the government can't give them a decent pay rise enough to make the work attractive to new graduates and to other people who might be thinking that they would want a career in healthcare. And it's going to be essential going forward for to maintain the entire system that people think they're being treated fairly in what is a market economy. And when you can make a lot more money by going and doing fairly basic jobs in resources industries, or by going into hospitality and not have the same level of responsibility for a large number of high acuity patients all at the same time, then that's a realistic factor that we have to take into account, that people will make career choices. So as we prepare for this wave and the one to come after that and the burden of long COVID on our system, we would call on governments to be sensible and to be forward thinking and to really look after those who will look after the rest of us when we're at our most difficult stages of life. So I come out in support of nurses many times previously, and I continue to do so, and I hope they get everything they deserve in the current industrial shenanigans that are going on. But don't be fooled by the politics of it all. The most important thing is that these healthcare workers need to be looked after much better than they have been before now. Thanks for your time.
That's Dr. Andrew Miller, and now a brief weather update. For those of you who have prayed for warmer temperatures, your wish has been granted. 27 on Monday with 12 degrees at night time and a high of 33 on Tuesday, with an overnight low of 15 degrees. 28 on Wednesday, 25 on Thursday and 25 on Friday. It'll be partly cloudy for the next few days with rain settling in later during the week. And that's Western Perspective this week. We'll be back with you again next Sunday. Until then, Ivan and Melly, it's back to you both.
It's great to know that summer's finally coming. Thanks, Maddie. And now, here's Leo with what's coming up on 6 News tonight.
Thanks, guys. On 6 News, 6 days to go. Pre-polling continues across Victoria as the Liberals face candidate scandals, but questions arise over what could happen if Labor wins the election and Dan Andrews loses. Fallout continues after an Upper House MP said she wants to turn the Victorian Premier into red mist. And the Medibank hacker releases close to 1,500 records in the latest batch of data to be put on the dark web. As you can see full details on those stories and plenty more by heading to our YouTube channel. Just search 6NewsAU to find us or head to our website 6newsau.com. For now, guys, it is back to you.
Thanks, Leo. And that's our weekly news and current affairs. We have the latest news on our website, wamnews.com.au.
Don't forget to subscribe to the WAMN Extra News Club so we can continue our work in the community. Full details on wamnews.com.au/news/extra. From Melly and myself, I wish you good health, good night. See you next Sunday.
Thanks for watching.